as now he was reading The Turkish Spy. The lamplight glinted on the rim of his spectacles and on the silvery hairs in his beard, the slack of which he had tucked under the edge of his blanket. His lips moved as he read, and now and then he broke off to glance mildly at Fide and the Snipe, who were busy beside the fire with a greasy pack of cards, or to listen to the peevish grumbling of Lashman in the bunk below him. Lashman had taken to his bed 6 weeks before with scurvy, and complained incessantly, and though they hardly knew it, these complaints were wearing his comrades' nerves to fiddle strings, doing the mischief that cold and bitter hard work and the cruel loneliness had hitherto failed to do. Longheed lay stretched by the fire in a bundle of skins, reading in his only book, the Bible, open now at the Song of Solomon. Cooney had finished patching a pair of trousers and rolled himself in his hammock, whence he stared at the roof and the moonlight streaming up there through the little trapdoors and chivying the layers of smoke. Whenever Lashman broke out into fresh quaverings of self-pity, Cooney's hands opened and shut again, till the nails dug hard into the palm. He groaned at length, exasperated beyond endurance. "Oh, stow it, George! Hang it all, man!" He checked himself, sharp and short, repentant and rebuked by the silence of the others. They were good seamen, all, and tender dealing with a sick shipmate was part of their code. Lashman's voice, more querulous than ever, cut into the silence like a knife. "That's it. You've thought it for weeks, and now you say it. I've knowed it all along. I'm just an encumbrance, and the sooner you're shut of me the better, says you. You needn't to fret. I'll be soon out of it, out there, alongside of Bill. Easy there, matey." The Snipe glanced over his shoulder and laid his cards face downward. "Here, let me give the bed a shake-up. It'll ease you. It'll make me quiet, you mean? Plucky deal you care about easing me, any of you. Get out with your nonsense. Dan didn't mean it." The Snipe slipped an arm under the invalid's head and rearranged the pillows of skin and gunny bags. "He didn't, did he? Let him say it then." The gaffer read on, his lips moving silently. Heaven knows how he'd acquired this strayed and stained and filthy little demi-octavo with the arms of Saumarez on its bookplate, the 6th volume of letters writ by a Turkish spy who lived 45 years undiscovered at Paris, giving an impartial account to the divan at Constantinople of the most remarkable transactions of Europe, and discovering several intrigues and secrets of the Christian courts, especially of that of France, etc., etc. swear it to you, George, and you'll just wet your throat to show there's no bad blood, and that you believe me. He took up a pannikin from the floor beside the bunk, pulled a hot iron from the fire, and stirred the frozen drink. The invalid turned his shoulder pettishly. "I didn't mean it," Cooney repeated. He set down the pannikin and shuffled wearily back to his hammock. The gaffer blew a long cloud and stared at the fire, at the smoke mounting and the grey ash dropping, at David fired, dealing the cards and licking his thumbs between each. Longheed shifted from one cramped elbow to another and pushed his Bible near the blaze, murmuring, "Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil our vines." "Full hand," the snipe announced. "Aye," David fired, rolled the quid in his cheek. The cards were so thumbed and tattered that by the backs of them each player guessed pretty shrewdly what the other held, yet they went on playing night after night, the snipe shrilly blessing or cursing his luck, the Scotsman phlegmatic as a bolster. "Play away, man. What ails you?" he asked. The snipe had dropped both hands to his thighs and sat up, stiff and listening. "Whist. Outside the door." All listened. "I hear nothing," said David after 10 seconds. "Hush, man. Listen. There, again." They heard now. Cooney slipped down from his hammock, stole to the door and listened, crouching with his ear close to the jamb. The sound resembled breathing, or so he thought for a moment. Then it seemed rather as if some creature were softly feeling about the door, fumbling its coating of ice and frozen snow. Cooney listened. They all listened. Usually, as soon as they stirred from the scorching circle of the fire, their breath came from them in clouds. It trickled from them now in thin wisps of vapour. They could almost hear the soft grey ash dropping on the hearth. A log spluttered, then the invalid's voice clattered in. "It's the bears. The bears. They've come after Bill, and next it'll be my turn. I warned you. I told you he wasn't deep enough. Oh, Lord have mercy, mercy." He pattered off into a prayer, his voice and teeth chattering. "Hush," commanded the gaffer gently, and Lashman choked on a sob. "It ain't bears," Cooney reported, still with his ear to the door. "Leastways, we've had bears before. The foxes, maybe. Let me listen." Longheed murmured, "Take us the foxes, the little foxes." "I believe you're right," the gaffer announced cheerfully. "A bear would sniff louder, though there's no telling. The snow was falling an hour back, and I dare say 'tis pretty thick outside. If 'tis a bear, we don't want him fouling on the roof, and I misstout the drift from the north corner is pretty tall by this time. Is he there still?" I felt something then through the chink, here, like a warm breath. It's gone now. Come here, snipe, and listen. Breath, eh? Did it smell like bear? "I don't know. I didn't smell nothing to notice. Here, put your head down, close." The snipe bent his head, and at that moment the door shook gently. All stirred and saw the latch move up, and falteringly descend on the staple. They heard the click of it. The door was secured within by 2 stout bars. Against these there had been no pressure. The men waited in a silence that ached, but the latch was not lifted again. chisel. Longheed lit his pipe, tied down the earpieces of his cap, lifted a light ladder off its staples, and set it against a roof beam. Then, with the guns under his arm, quietly mounted. His head and shoulders wavered and grew vague to sight in the smoke wreaths. "Heard anything more?" he asked. "Nothing since," answered the snipe. With his shoulder, Longheed pushed up the trap. They saw his head framed in a panel of moonlight, with one frosty star above it. He was wriggling through. "Pitch him up a sleeping bag, somebody," the gaffer ordered, and Cooney ran with one. "Thank ye, mate," said Longheed, and closed the trap. They heard his feet stealthily crunching the frozen stuff across the roof. He was working towards the eaves, overlapping the door. Their breath tightened. They waited for the explosion of his gun. None came. The crunching began again. It was heard down by the very edge of the eaves. It mounted to the blunt ridge overhead. Then it ceased. "He will not have seen aught," David Fired muttered. "Listen, you. Listen by the door again." They talked in whispers. Nothing. There was nothing to be heard. They crept back to the fire and stood there warming themselves, keeping their eyes on the latch. It did not move. After a while, Cooney slipped off to his hammock, Fired to his bunk, alongside Lashman's. The gaffer had picked up his book again. The snipe laid a couple of logs on the blaze. And remained beside it, cowering with his arms stretched out, as if to embrace it. His shapeless shadow wavered up and down on the bunks. Behind him and across the fire, he still stared at the latch. Suddenly the sick man's voice quavered out. "It's not him they want, it's Bill. They're after Bill. Out there. That was Bill trying to get in. Why didn't you open it? It was Bill, I tell you." At the first word, the snipe had wheeled right about face, and stood now pointing and shaking like a man with ague. "Matey, for the love of God, I won't hush. There's something wrong here tonight. I can't sleep. It's Bill, I tell you. See his poor hammock up there shaking." Cooney tumbled out with an oath and a thud. "Hush it, you white-livered swine. Hush it or by." His hand went behind him to his knife sheath. "Dan Cooney." The gaffer closed his book and leaned out. "Go back to your bed." "I won't, sir. Not unless. Go back. Flesh and blood. Go back." And for the third time that night, Cooney went back. The gaffer leaned a little farther over the ledge and addressed the sick man. "George, I went to Bill's grave not 6 hours ago. The snow on it wasn't even disturbed. Neither beast nor man, but only God, can break up the hard earth he lies under. I tell you that, and you may lie to it. Now go to sleep." Longheed crouched on the frozen ridge of the hut, with his feet in the sleeping bag, his knees drawn up, and the two guns laid across them. The creature, whatever its name, that had tried the door, was nowhere to be seen, but he decided to wait a few minutes on the chance of a shot, that is, until the cold should drive him below. For the moment, the clear, tingling air was doing him good. The truth was, Longheed had begun to be afraid of himself, and the way his mind had been running for the last 48 hours upon green fields and visions of spring. As he put it to himself, something inside his head was melting. Biblical texts chattered within him like running brooks, and as they fleeted he could almost smell the blown meadow scent. "Take us the foxes, ice pack off the beach. Only that. Take us the foxes, the little foxes. This would never do. He must climb down and walk briskly or return to the hut. Maybe there was a bear after all behind one of the hummocks, and a shot, or the chance of one, would scatter his head clear of these tomfooling notions. He would have a search round. What was that? Moving on a hummock, not 500 yards away. He leaned forward to gaze. Nothing now, but he had seen something. He lowered himself to the eaves by the north corner, and from the eaves to the drift piled there. The drift was frozen solid, but for a treacherous crust of fresh snow. His foot slipped upon this, and down he slid of a heap. Luckily, he had been careful to sling the guns tightly at his back. He picked himself up, and unstrapping one, took a step into the bright moonlight, took 2 steps, and stood stock still. There before him on the frozen coat of snow was a footprint. No, 2, 3, 4, many footprints, prints of a naked human foot, right foot, left foot, both naked, and blood in each print, a little smear. It had come then. He was mad for certain. He saw them. He put his fingers in them, touched the frozen blood. The snow before the door was trodden thick with them. Same going, some returning. The latch lifted. Suddenly he recalled the figure he had seen moving upon the hummock, and with a groan he set his face northward and gave chase. Oh, he was mad for certain. He ran like a madman, floundering, slipping, plunging in his clumsy moccasins. Take us the foxes, the little foxes, my beloved put in his hand by the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, I charge you. He ran thus for 300 yards maybe, and then stopped as suddenly as he had started. His mates, they must not see these footprints, or they would go mad too, mad as he. No, he must cover them up, all within sight of the hut, and tomorrow he would come alone and cover those further afield. Slowly he retraced his steps. The footprints, those which pointed towards the hut, and those which pointed away from it, lay close together, and he knelt before each, breaking fresh snow over the hollows, and carefully hiding the blood. And now a great happiness filled his heart, interrupted once or twice as he worked by a feeling that someone was following and watching him. Snipe climbed the ladder, pushed open the trap, and came back, reporting that Longheed was nowhere to be seen. The old man slipped a jumper over his suits of clothing, already 3 deep, reached for a gun, and moved to the door. "Take a cup of something warm to fortify," the Snipe advised. "The kettle won't be 5 minutes boiling." But the gaffer pushed up the heavy bolts and dragged the door open. "What in the... Here, bear a hand, lads." Longheed lay prone before the threshold, his outstretched hands almost touching it, his moccasins already covered out of sight by the powdery snow which ran and trickled incessantly, trickled between his long dishevelled locks and over the back of his gloves, and ran in a thin stream past the gaffer's feet. They carried him in and laid him on a heap of skins by the fire. They forced rum between his clenched teeth, and beat his hands and feet, and kneaded and rubbed him. A sigh fluttered on his lips, something between a sigh and a smile, half seen, half heard. His eyes opened, and his comrades saw that it was really a smile. "What cheer, mate?" It was the Snipe who asked. I seen." The voice broke off, but he was smiling still. What had he seen? Not the sun, surely. By the gaffer's reckoning, the sun would not be due for a week or 2 yet. How many weeks he could not say precisely, and sometimes he was glad enough that he did not know. They forced him to drink a couple of spoonfuls of rum, and wrapped him up that's the end